Matriarch Salith stood at the observation window and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, death was coming for her people. The scientists had shown her the calculations many times. A rogue neutron star was passing through their system. Its radiation wave would reach their planet in 72 hours. When it arrived, every living thing on Sanctuary 7 would die. The Velith were a peaceful species. Their skin was made of living crystal that caught the light in beautiful colors. They had lived on this mining colony for 300 years. They had never hurt anyone. They had never made enemies. They had always believed the galaxy would protect them if they ever needed help. They were wrong. Celeste looked at the communication logs on her desk. She had sent messages to every major power in the galaxy. The consortium had replied first. They expressed deep sorrow and explained that evacuation was impossible. The radiation interference made jump lanes unstable. No fleet could reach them in time. The Velith should prepare for the end with dignity. The Keth Empire sent similar words. The Morith Federation did the same. One by one, every civilization in the galaxy told the Velith the same thing. We are sorry. We cannot help. We will remember you. Celeste felt the weight of 40,000 lives pressing down on her shoulders. 40,000 Velith who trusted her to find a way. 40,000 souls who would turn to dust in 3 days. Because the universe had decided their time was over. She walked through the colony that evening. Families gathered in the streets. Parents held their children close. The elderly sat together and sang old songs from their homeworld. No one was panicking. The Velith were not a species that screamed or fought against fate. They accepted what came with quiet grace. But Salith saw the fear in their eyes. She saw the children who did not understand why everyone was so sad. She saw young couples holding hands, knowing they would never grow old together. She saw all of this, and something inside her refused to accept it. In the communications center, a young officer named Tyron was working late. She was barely an adult by Velith standards, her crystal skin still showing the pale blue of youth. She had been monitoring the responses from across the galaxy. Logging each rejection with trembling hands, Tyron looked at her screen and felt anger rising in her chest. This was not right. Her people were good. They had helped everyone who asked. They had shared their mining technology freely. They had welcomed travelers and refugees. How could the galaxy just let them die? She pulled up the frequency charts and scrolled through them. Standard channels, emergency bands, diplomatic frequencies. All had been tried. All had failed. Then she saw it. A restricted band near the quarantine zone around the Sol system. The humans, every child in the galaxy knew about humans. They came from a death world called Earth, a planet so hostile that surviving there required constant struggle. Humans had evolved to endure poison air, extreme temperatures, deadly predators, and countless diseases. They were strong, fast, and utterly terrifying. The Galactic Consortium had quarantined them 50 years ago. Not because humans had attacked anyone. They quarantined them because humans were too dangerous to let loose in a peaceful galaxy. Humans solved problems with violence. They ate the flesh of other creatures. They kept deadly animals as pets. They found joy in activities that would kill any other species. Tyron hesitated. The protocols were clear. No one was supposed to contact humans without consortium approval. The quarantine existed for good reason. Humans were the monsters that parents warned their children about, but her people were going to die. Every other option had failed. What was the point of following rules when extinction was the alternative? She looked around the empty communications room. No one would know. And even if they found out later, what would it matter? They would all be dead anyway. Tyron entered the restricted frequency. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to type the codes 3 times. Finally, the channel opened. She took a deep breath and began to speak. This is the Velith colony of Sanctuary 7 calling any human vessel. We are facing extinction. A radiation wave will reach our planet in 72 hours. 40,000 of us will die. Every other species has told us rescue is impossible. We are asking for help. Please, if anyone can hear this, we need you. She sent the message and waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. She sent it again. Still nothing. An hour went by with only static filling the room. Tyron put her head in her hands. Of course it had not worked. The humans probably did not even monitor these frequencies. Or maybe they had heard and simply did not care. Why would Deathworld monsters help a species they had never met? She was about to shut down the console when a voice crackled through the speakers. It was rough and strange, speaking in an accent she did not recognize, but the words were clear. Velith Colony, this is the United Nations ship Defiance. We heard your signal. We are coming. Do not lose hope. Repeat, do not lose hope. Help is on the way. Tyron stared at the console in shock. Her crystal skin pulsed with light as emotions, flooded through her. Hope, fear, confusion. She did not know whether to laugh or cry. She ran through the corridors to find Matriarch Salith. The older woman was in her quarters, sitting alone in the darkness. Tyron burst through the door without knocking. Matriarch. Someone answered. The humans answered. They say they are coming. Salith looked up slowly. Her eyes were tired and sad. When she processed what Tyron had said, those eyes went wide with something new. Terror. The humans. She whispered. You contacted the humans? No one else would help us. They were our only chance. Salith stood up and walked to her window. She stared out at the stars for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Child, do you know what you have done? The humans are quarantined for a reason. They are predators, killers. Their entire history is written in blood. We sent an SOS to the most dangerous species in the galaxy, that they said they would help. Help. Salith turned to face her. The humans do not help. They conquer. They dominate. They break everything they touch. You may have saved us from the radiation wave, Tyron, but what comes next might be worse. Tyron felt her hope crumbling. She had been so desperate, so certain that any response was better than silence. Now she saw the fear in her matriarch's eyes, and she understood why the galaxy had locked the humans away. What had she invited to their world? Far away, across the vast darkness of space, 7 human ships were already changing course. Captain Alina Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Defiance and read the Velith distress call again. 40,000 lives. 72 hours. Every other species had abandoned them. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. The galaxy thought humans were monsters. Maybe it was time to show them what monsters could do when they chose to help instead of harm. All ships, she announced over the fleet channel, set course for Sanctuary 7. Maximum speed. We have people to save. The engines roared to life, and the human fleet raced toward the dying colony. The Deathworlders had heard the call. They were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. They sent an SOS in desperation. The Deathworlders heard it and came part 2. Captain Elena Vasquez had been celebrating her daughter's 7th birthday when the distress call came through. The party was happening on the recreation deck of the Defiance. Balloons and cake and 20 children running around screaming with joy. Alina had been laughing at her daughter's frosting-covered face when her communicator buzzed. She read the message. Then she read it again. 40,000 lives. 72 hours. Nobody else coming. Alina kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered that Mommy had to go to work. The little girl nodded seriously. She was a spacer's child. She understood. Within an hour, Alina stood on the bridge of her ship and watched as volunteers flooded the recruitment stations across every human outpost in the sector. The news had spread fast. A species called the Velith was dying, and the entire galaxy had turned its back on them. That was not something humans could ignore. Her first officer, Commander David Chen, handed her a datapad with the volunteer numbers. 3,000 people in the first 30 minutes. We had to start turning them away. How many ships can we get? 7 confirmed. 2 more are trying to break orbit from Mars Station, but they will not make it in time. Lena nodded. 7 ships. 2,000 volunteers. That would have to be enough. the Defiance's chief engineer. A massive woman named Olga Petrov came storming onto the bridge with wild eyes. "Captain, I have been looking at the coordinates. The jump lanes near Sanctuary 7 are completely unstable. That radiation is throwing off every navigation beacon in the sector. Can we get through?" Normally, I would say no. But I have an idea. A very stupid idea. Alina smiled. "Those are my favorite kind." Olga explained her plan. Instead of using the established jump lanes, they would chart a new one in real time. This was theoretically possible, but practically suicidal. Jump lane calculations usually took weeks of careful measurement. Doing it on the fly meant risking a navigation error that could scatter their atoms across 1,000 light years. Alina asked. "Maybe 70% survival rate per ship? Maybe less." Alina looked around the bridge at her crew. These were good people. Brave people. They had families waiting for them back home. She had no right to ask them to risk their lives on a 70% chance. But then she thought about the Valith. 40,000 souls who had done nothing wrong. 40,000 people who had asked for help and received only silence. "Send the plan to all ships," she said. "Make it clear this is volunteer only. Anyone who wants to stay behind can do so with no shame." Not a single person left their post. Across the galaxy, the consortium watched the human mobilization with growing alarm. Ambassador Krell of the Morath Federation addressed the Emergency Council in his deep, rumbling voice. "This is exactly why we quarantine them. Look at them. They are charging into certain death without a moment of hesitation. They do not think like rational beings. They do not calculate risk and reward. They simply act." "Perhaps we should have acted ourselves," said a quiet voice from the back. It was Ambassador Yeel of the Keth Empire, a small creature with large eyes. "We told the Velith that rescue was impossible. The humans did not accept that answer, because they are insane, or because they are brave." The council argued for hours while the human fleet prepared for launch. In the end, they decided to send an official warning to the Velith colony. The humans were coming, and the consortium could not guarantee the safety of anyone who accepted their help. On Sanctuary 7, Matriarch Salith received the warning with a heavy heart. She gathered her advisors and shared the news. The humans were really coming. 7 ships, 2,000 soldiers racing across the galaxy to save a species they had never met. "We should refuse their help," said Eldermoth, the oldest member of the council. "Better to die with dignity than to owe our lives to Deathworld monsters." "It's easy for you to say," snapped Tyron, who had been invited to the meeting despite her youth. "You have lived a full life. What about the children? Do they not deserve a chance?" "A chance at what?" "Slavery. Conquest. We know nothing about these humans except that the entire galaxy fears them." Salith raised her hand for silence. "The humans will arrive in approximately 40 hours. The radiation wave will hit in 68. That gives us very little time to decide." She looked out the window at her people. Families were still gathering in the streets, still singing, still holding each other close. They had accepted death because no other option existed. But now another option was speeding toward them through the darkness of space. "We will accept their help," Saleth said finally. "Whatever comes after, at least our children will have a chance to face it. That is more than we had yesterday." The council fell silent. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked away in shame or fear, but no one argued. The decision was made. Across the void, the human fleet made final preparations. Captain Vasquez walked through the corridors of the Defiance and saw her crew working with fierce determination. Engineers checked and rechecked the engines. Medics prepared treatment bays for species they had never encountered. Soldiers cleaned their weapons and wrote letters to loved ones, just in case. She stopped to talk with Dr. James Okonkwo, the fleet's chief medical officer. He was a tall man, with kind eyes and steady hands. He had been studying everything known about Velith biology since the moment they received the distress call. "Can we treat them?" Alina asked. "I do not know yet. Their physiology is completely different from ours. Crystal-based life forms. It is fascinating, actually, but I will figure it out. I have to. You have about 36 hours. James smiled. Then I better stop talking and get back to work. Lena continued her walk and ended up in the cargo bay where volunteers were loading emergency supplies. Food, water, medical equipment, emergency shelters. They were preparing for the largest evacuation in human history, and they had less than 2 days to make it work. A young soldier named Private Torres was struggling with a heavy crate. Alina walked over and grabbed the other end, helping him lift it onto the transport pallet. "Captain," Torres said in surprise, "you should not be doing manual labor. Neither should you. You should be sleeping." "We have a long flight ahead," Torres shook his head. "Cannot sleep, ma'am. Every time I close my eyes, I think about those people out there, waiting, hoping, wondering if anyone is coming." Alina set down the crate and looked at the young man. He was barely 20 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him, and he was volunteering to fly into a radiation storm to save aliens he had never met. "Why did you sign up for this mission?" she asked. Torres thought for a moment. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth, about all the times humans helped each other through disasters, earthquakes, floods, wars. She said that was what made us human. Not our strength or our intelligence, but our refusal to let others suffer alone." He paused and looked at the cargo bay full of supplies. "The galaxy thinks we are monsters. Maybe they are right. But monsters can still do good things. And right now, those people need monsters on their side." Alina felt her eyes grow wet. She blinked the tears away and clapped Torres on the shoulder.
"Get some sleep, Private."
"That is an order. Tomorrow, we show the galaxy what humans are really made of." She walked back to the bridge as the fleet prepared for the jump. 7 ships. 2,000 souls. One impossible mission. The countdown began. And then, with a flash of light that tore through the fabric of space, the human fleet vanished into the void. They were on their way to Sanctuary 7. Whatever waited for them there, they would face it together. The Deathworlders were coming. They sent an SOS in desperation. The Deathworlders heard it, and came Part 3. The radiation wave was moving faster than anyone had predicted. Matriarch Salith received the updated calculations with cold dread settling in her chest. 72 hours had become 36. The death that had seemed distant was now racing toward them with hungry speed. The humans had said they would arrive in 40 hours. That meant they would be 4 hours too late. That meant every Velith on Sanctuary 7 would be dead. Before help arrived, Salith stood at the observation window and watched the distant stars. Somewhere out there, 7 human ships were pushing their engines beyond safe limits, trying to reach a species they had never met. It was a beautiful gesture. It was also pointless now. She had just turned away from the window when the sky tore open. A flash of blinding light split the darkness above the colony. Then another, and another. 5 points of impossible brightness that burned like new suns for a single heartbeat before fading. And in their place, 5 ships hung in the void where none had been before. Alarms screamed throughout the colony. Velith poured into the streets, their crystal skin flashing with fear and confusion. Salith ran to the communications center, her old joints protesting every step. "Psst," she demanded as she burst through the door. Tyron was already at the console, her young face pale with shock. "It is the humans' matriarch." They arrived. But the calculations say they should not be here for another 4 hours. They came through a jump lane that does not exist on any chart. How is that possible? I do not know. But matriarch. Tyron's voice trembled. There were supposed to be 7 ships. I only count 5. Saleth felt her heart grow cold. 2 ships had not made it. 2 ships full of humans who had died trying to reach them faster. They had sacrificed themselves, gambling on an impossible shortcut. All to save a few extra hours. Before she could process this, the communications console crackled to life. A human voice filled the room, strong and clear despite the static. "Velith Colony, this is Captain Alina Vasquez of the UNSS Defiance. We apologize for the rough arrival. We lost 2 ships in the jump, and we will mourn them later. Right now, we have work to do. Evacuation begins immediately. Please direct your people to the landing zones." Salith grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "Captain, We received word that the radiation wave accelerated. You arrived before it was supposed to hit. That is why we took the shortcut. Now stop talking and start moving. We have about 32 hours to get 40,000 people off this rock. The human ships descended through the atmosphere like falling stars. They landed in the open fields outside the main colony, their engines scorching the ground black. Before the dust had settled, ramps were dropping and humans were pouring out into the alien air. Celeste watched them come. She had expected soldiers in armor, weapons ready, eyes cold and predatory. What she saw instead nearly broke her heart. The humans were already sick. She could see it in the way some of them moved slower than the others, their skin showing strange colors. The radiation from their impossible jump had poisoned them. They had known it would. They had come anyway. Captain Vasquez was the first to reach the colony gates. She was a small woman with dark hair and tired eyes, but she moved with the energy of someone who refused to rest. Behind her came doctors and engineers and soldiers, all carrying equipment, all shouting orders in their strange, harsh language. Matriarch Celeth? The captain asked, extending her hand. Celeth did not know the gesture. Tyron whispered an explanation. It was a human greeting, a sign of peace and trust. Celeth reached out and touched the human's hand. It was warm, almost hot, like holding a stone that had been sitting in the sun. Captain, your people are ill. The radiation from the jump we know. Do not worry about us. Humans are tough. We have survived worse. She smiled, and despite everything, it was a kind smile. Now show me your people. We have a lot of work to do. The evacuation began in chaos and quickly found its rhythm. The humans seemed to know exactly what they were doing, organizing Veleth into groups, leading them to transport ships, carrying those who could not walk. Their efficiency was terrifying. Dr. James Okonkwo set up a medical station near the landing zone. He had studied Veleth biology for less than 2 days, but he worked with the confidence of a lifetime expert. When Veleth healers approached with questions, he listened carefully and adapted his treatments on the spot. A young Veleth child approached him with wide, curious eyes. Her crystal skin was the pale pink of spring flowers. She tugged on his sleeve and asked a question in her musical voice. She wants to know why you came, her mother translated, pulling the child back. I apologize. She is young and does not understand. James knelt down, so he was at the child's eye level. Because you asked for help, he said simply. And helping people is what we do. The child did not understand his words, but she understood his smile. She reached out and touched his face with her tiny crystal fingers, then laughed and ran back to her mother. Tyron worked alongside the humans, helping translate guiding groups to the transports, answering questions. She watched the humans closely, searching for the monsters the galaxy had warned her about. She saw only exhausted people pushing themselves beyond all limits. A human soldier named Torres was carrying an elderly Veleth man on his back. The old man was too frail to walk, and the transport was still 100 meters away. Torres was already showing signs of radiation sickness, a tremor in his hands, sweat on his pale face. But he did not slow down. You should rest, Tyron told him. You are sick, Torres shook his head. I will rest when everyone is safe. Not before. Why? Why do you care so much about people you do not know? The soldier was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Tyron would remember for the rest of her life. 'Cause someday, it might be us sending the SOS, and we want to live in a galaxy where someone answers. Hours passed. The first transport ship lifted off, packed with 3,000 Veleth. Then the second, then the third. The humans worked without stopping, pushing through exhaustion and sickness, refusing to rest while even one Veleth remained on the surface. But the numbers were not working. Matriarch Saleth did the calculations again and again, hoping she had made a mistake. She had not. The 5 ships could carry 15,000 people at most. There were 40,000 Veleth on Sanctuary-7. She found Captain Vasquez. Overseeing the loading of the 4th transport, the human woman was leaning against a crate, her face gray with fatigue, but her eyes were still sharp. Captain, we need to talk about the numbers. Vasquez nodded slowly. I know, we cannot take everyone in one trip. We need to make multiple runs. There is no time for multiple runs. The radiation wave will hit in 20 hours. Your ships cannot get everyone to safety and come back before then. Then we will have to stay on the surface and keep loading until the last possible moment. We will send the transports with as many people as they can carry, and the crews will stay behind to load the rest. Celeste stared at her. Captain, if your crews stay behind, they will die. The radiation will kill them. Elena Vasquez looked at the Velith matriarch with steady eyes. I know, she said softly. But we did not come all this way to save only some of you. We came to save everyone, and we will, even if it costs us everything. She walked away before Celeste could respond, shouting orders to her crew, organizing the next wave of evacuees. The Velith matriarch watched her go and felt something shift in her understanding of the universe. These were not monsters. These were something far more terrifying. These were people who valued other lives more than their own. The fourth transport lifted off. The fifth began loading, and the radiation wave continued its hungry march toward the colony. Counting down the hours until death arrived, the humans worked faster. They sent an SOS in desperation. The Deathworlders heard it and came part, for the radiation wave was visible now. It hung on the horizon like a wall of shimmering light, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Every Velith who looked at it felt the cold grip of fear in their chest. Death was coming, and it was coming fast. 30,000 Velith had been evacuated. 10,000 remained. The human transport ships were making their final runs, engines screaming with the strain of too many trips too close together. Captain Vasquez had pushed the schedule to its absolute limit. And still, it was not enough. She stood in the middle of the loading zone, watching families stream past her toward the waiting ships. Velith children clung to their parents. The elderly were carried by anyone strong enough to help. Everyone moved with desperate speed, but there was no panic. The humans had organized everything too well for panic. Commander Chen appeared at her side, a datapad in his hand. Final count, Captain. We can fit 8,000 more on the transports if we pack them tight. That leaves 2,000 Velith and all of our ground crews. How many of our people? 600. The ship crews have already departed. Only the ground teams remain. Alina closed her eyes. 600 humans who had volunteered to stay behind. 600 people who knew exactly what that meant and chose to do it anyway. She wanted to order them onto the ships, to force them to save themselves, but she knew they would refuse. They had not come this far to abandon anyone. Load everyone we can, she said. The rest of us will find another way. Chen nodded and ran off to coordinate the final loading. Alina walked through the chaos, stopping to help where she could, speaking quiet words of encouragement to her exhausted crew. They were all showing signs of radiation sickness now. Tremors, nausea, bleeding gums. The jump through the unstable lane had poisoned them, and every hour on this planet made it worse. Private Torres was still working, though he could barely stand. He was helping a Velith family load their belongings onto a transport, smiling and joking despite the pain written on his face. Alina stopped beside him. Torres, get on that ship. Negative, ma'am. Still, people who need help. That is an order, Private. Torres looked at her with eyes that were too bright, too feverish. Captain, with respect, you are not getting on that ship either. So I am staying right here. Alina could not argue with that. She moved on. Near the edge of the landing zone, Tyrion was saying goodbye to her mother. The older Velith woman had been loaded onto the last transport, but Tyrion had refused to go. She had claimed she was needed to translate, but Alina suspected there was more to it than that. You should go with her, Alina said. Approaching the young Velith, Tyrion shook her head, her crystal skin glowing with soft determination. I am the one who sent the message. I am the reason you are here. If anyone should stay and face what comes next, it is me. That is very brave. It is also very stupid. I learned from watching humans. Despite everything, Alina laughed. It was a harsh sound, tired and rough, but it was real. This young alien had more courage than most soldiers she had known. The last transport lifted off with 8,000 Velith packed inside. The engines roared, the ship rose into the sky, and then it was gone. Silence fell over the colony, broken only by the distant hum of the radiation wave. Alina looked around at who remained. 600 humans, scattered across the landing zone. 2,000 Velith, who had been unable to make it to the transports in time. And the wall of death now so close that she could see individual particles dancing in its glow. Well, she said to no one in particular, "I suppose we need a new plan." Matriarch Seleth emerged from the crowd of remaining Velith. She moved slowly, her old body showing the strain of the past days, but her eyes were clear and calm. "Captain, my people know these mines better than anyone. There are tunnels that go deep into the planet, far below the surface. The radiation cannot reach that far down. Can they hold 600 humans and 2,000 Velith? The main shaft is large enough, but we would need to seal it against the radiation. That would require collapsing the upper tunnels." Alina considered this. Sealing themselves underground was not a great plan. If something went wrong, they would be trapped. But the alternative was certain death. How long would we need to stay down there? The radiation wave will pass in 16 hours. After that, the surface should be safe. Rescue ships could reach us within a day. Then that is what we do. Everyone moved toward the mines. Now, the evacuation shifted direction. Humans and Velith moved together through the empty streets of the colony, heading for the mine entrance at the edge of town. The radiation wave was close enough now that some people reported feeling its warmth on their skin. Time was running out. Dr. Okonkwo organized the medical supplies they had left, handing out radiation medication to everyone who could take it. The Velith healers worked alongside him, preparing their own remedies for their people. There was no time for careful science. There was only time for hope. The mine entrance yawned before them like the mouth of some great beast. Velith workers had already begun preparing the main shaft, clearing debris and checking structural supports. Humans joined them without hesitation. Lending their strength to the effort, Torres worked alongside a Velith man named Cole, hauling heavy beams into place. Despite their different species, they fell into an easy rhythm, communicating through gestures and shared effort. When Torres stumbled, Cole caught him. When Cole's crystal arms began to crack from strain, Torres took over his load. "You humans are strange," Cole said during a brief rest. "We were told you were monsters, killers, that you would hurt us if you ever got the chance." "We can be monsters," Torres admitted. "We have done terrible things in our history, but we can also be more than that. Today, we choose to be more." The last Velith entered the mine shaft just as the radiation wave reached the outer edges of the colony. Alina stood at the entrance, watching the shimmering wall of light consume the buildings they had just left. It was beautiful in a horrible way, like watching a sunset that killed everything it touched. Chen called from inside, "We need to seal the entrance now." Alina took one last look at the sky. Somewhere up there, transports full of Velith were racing to safety. Somewhere up there, the galaxy was watching to see how this ended. She turned and walked into the darkness. The charges detonated, and the tunnel entrance collapsed behind them. Dust and debris filled the air. The sound was deafening, like the world itself was breaking apart. And then, suddenly, silence. 600 humans and 2,000 Velith stood in the darkness, listening to their own breathing. The radiation wave passed overhead, invisible now, harmless behind meters of solid rock. "Is everyone okay?" Alina called out. Voices answered from the darkness. Humans and Velith alike, confirming they had survived. Someone found emergency lights and activated them. The weak glow revealed faces covered in dust, eyes wide with shock and relief. A Velith child began to cry. Then a human voice rose in the darkness, singing softly. It was an old Earth song, something about not being afraid. Other voices joined in, human and Velith, singing in different languages, but sharing the same melody. Alina found a rock to sit on and let herself breathe. They were trapped underground, surrounded by radiation, with no guarantee that rescue would come. But they were alive, and as long as they were alive, there was hope. Dr. Okonkwo approached with a medical scanner. "Captain, your radiation levels are critical. You need treatment now. Treat the others first. The ones who are worse? Captain, you are the worst. You have been outside longer than anyone. Please, let me help you." Elena looked at the people around her. Humans and Velith, sitting together in the darkness, sharing water and food, telling stories to pass the time. They had done something impossible today. They had refused to accept death. "Fine," she said. "But only because I want to see how this ends." Okonkwo smiled and began his work. Above them, the radiation wave continued its passage across the planet, killing everything on the surface. Below, in the darkness of the mines, two species waited together for salvation, and somewhere in the galaxy, the rescue ships were already on their way. They sent an SOS in desperation. The Deathworlders heard it, and came Part 5. 16 hours felt like 16 years in the darkness of the mines, Captain. Lena Vasquez drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting the radiation that had poisoned her blood. Dr. Okonkwo stayed by her side, monitoring her vital signs, adjusting her medication whenever she started to fade. He was sick too, they all were, but he refused to rest while patients needed him. Around them, underground chamber had transformed into something unexpected. Humans and Velith sat together in small groups, sharing stories, learning each other's languages, forming bonds that had seemed impossible just days ago. The Velith children had overcome their fear of the strange aliens and now played games with human soldiers who taught them simple Earth songs. Tyron sat with Private Torres, practicing human words while he learned Velith phrases. They had started as translator and soldier, but somewhere in the long hours of darkness, they had become friends. "Do humans never stop?" Tyron asked. "Even when you are sick, even when you are dying, you keep working. Keep fighting." "It does not make sense." Torres thought about the question. His hands trembled from radiation sickness, and his vision blurred at the edges, but his mind was clear. On Earth, everything tried to kill us. The animals, the weather, the diseases. We survived because we refused to give up. Quitting means death, so we learned to never quit, no matter how bad things got. But you did not have to come here. You could have stayed safe on your ships. Why risk your lives for strangers? Torres smiled weakly. Because that is who we want to be. Not monsters. Not killers. Just people who help when help is needed. Matriarch Celeste walked through the chamber, checking on her people, offering comfort where she could. She stopped when she reached Captain Vasquez's makeshift bed. The human woman looked small and fragile, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. But her eyes opened when Celeste approached. Matriarch Alina whispered, "How are your people? They are alive because of you." "How are yours?" 17 did not make it. The radiation from the jump was too much for them. Elena's voice cracked. They knew the risks. They came anyway. Sleth knelt beside the human captain. On Sanctuary 7, we have a tradition. When someone gives their life for another, we carve their name in crystal. It shines forever, catching the light, reminding us of their sacrifice. That is beautiful. We will carve human names now. You're 17. The crews of the two ships that did not survive the jump, all of them. They will shine alongside our greatest heroes. Lena felt tears running down her cheeks. She did not have the strength to wipe them away. The galaxy thinks we are monsters. The galaxy was wrong. A rumble shook the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling. Everyone went silent, looking up with fear in their eyes. Had the radiation wave returned? Had the tunnels started to collapse? Then a voice crackled through the emergency communication system. It was speaking Standard Galactic, the common language of the consortium. Sanctuary 7, this is the rescue fleet. The radiation wave has passed. Please respond. Dr. Okonkwo grabbed the communicator. Rescue fleet, this is Dr. James Okonkwo of the human medical team. We are alive. Repeat, we are alive. 600 humans and 2,000 Velith, sealed in the primary mine shaft. We need immediate evacuation and medical assistance. There was a pause. Then the voice returned, filled with something that sounded like wonder. Understood, Doctor. We are clearing the entrance now. Hold on. Help is coming. The chamber erupted in cheers. Humans and Valeth embraced each other, laughing and crying at the same time. They had survived. Against all odds, against the predictions of every scientist and strategist in the galaxy. They had survived. It took 3 hours to clear the collapsed tunnel entrance. When the first rays of sunlight finally pierced the darkness, it felt like being born again. Rescue workers poured into the chamber, carrying stretchers and medical equipment. Helping the survivors toward the surface, Alina Vasquez was carried out on a stretcher, too weak to walk. But she insisted on keeping her eyes open, watching as her people emerged into the light. 583 humans had survived. 17 had died in the darkness. Succumbing to the radiation that had poisoned them from the start, the rescue ships took them to a consortium medical station, where doctors worked around the clock to treat the radiation exposure. It took weeks for some of them to recover. Some never fully would. But they were alive. That was more than anyone had expected. The galaxy watched the footage from Sanctuary 7 with something like shock. The consortium had expected the humans to fail. They had expected tragedy and chaos. Instead, they saw humans and Veleth working side by side, saving each other, dying for each other. They saw monsters become heroes. Ambassador Krell of the Morath Federation stood before the Galactic Council with a proposal that would have seemed impossible a month ago. He looked tired, his confidence shaken by what he had witnessed. The quarantine on humanity must be lifted, he said. We have spent 50 years treating them as a threat. But what happened at Sanctuary 7 has shown us a different truth. The humans are not our enemies. They are exactly the kind of allies we need in this dangerous universe. The vote was not even close. The quarantine ended that day. 1 year later, a new monument stood in the rebuilt colony of Sanctuary 7. It was carved from the same crystal that the Veleth had mined for generations, and it showed 2 hands clasped together. One was the delicate crystal hand of a Veleth. The other was the solid flesh of a human. The inscription beneath it read simply, "They heard us. They came." Captain Alina Vasquez attended the dedication ceremony, standing with Matriarch Saleth and the survivors of that terrible week. She was still not fully recovered and probably never would be. But she would not miss this moment for anything. Tyron was there too. Now serving as the official liaison between the Veleth and human governments, she had learned perfect English in the years since the rescue, and she used it to translate the speeches for the human guests. When the ceremony ended, she approached Captain Vasquez. "Captain, there is something I have wanted to ask you since the mines." "Ask. When you made the decision to stay behind, when you knew you might die, were you afraid?" Alina considered the question. She thought about the darkness, the radiation, the faces of her crew as they realized they might not survive. She thought about the Veleth children singing human songs and the human soldiers learning Veleth prayers. "Yes," she said finally. "I was terrified. But fear is not the same as hesitation. We were afraid, and we did it anyway. That is what makes us human." Tyron nodded slowly. "The galaxy was wrong about you. We are still the same species we always were. We can be cruel. We can be violent. We have done terrible things. But we can also be kind. We can sacrifice. We can love. The galaxy only saw one side of us. Now they have seen the other. Across the rebuilt colony, Veleth and humans walked together through streets that had once been dead. Children played where the radiation wave had passed. Life had returned to a world that should have been a grave. And throughout the galaxy, new protocols were being written. The emergency frequency that connected to Earth was no longer restricted. It was mandatory. Every species, every colony, every ship now had a direct line to the Deathworlders. Because if the unthinkable ever happened, if disaster struck and all hope seemed lost, they knew exactly who to call. The humans would answer. They would always answer, because that was who they chose to be.